What was the real reason old Joliet prison was shut down? Was it the prisoners, the violence, or something darker? The true story behind its closure may not be what you think. My name is Ryan Carter, and this story begins on a cold, gloomy evening in October 2022. It was the 15th of October, a night that would forever haunt me as I discovered the dark, twisted secrets of one of the oldest and most notorious places in the United States, Old Joliet Prison. Located in Joliet, Illinois, this abandoned prison had been empty for years, yet it still seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. I had always been intrigued by haunted places, their histories, and the stories that remain locked behind their decaying walls. Old Joliet Prison was no exception. But there was something more unsettling about this place. Something that made my skin crawl every time I read about it. And as I stood before its rusting gates, the evening fog creeping around my feet, I could feel the weight of its past pressing down on me. This was a place that had once housed some of the most dangerous criminals in America. Opened in 1858, Joliet Prison had been a fortress of suffering and violence for over a century. It was here that men like John Wayne Gacy, the infamous serial killer, had been locked away, his presence still lingering in the air like a toxic cloud. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Joliet had witnessed brutality on an unimaginable scale, with prisoners subjected to horrendous conditions, forced labor, and countless deaths. But what truly intrigued me were the rumors. The whispers of things that happened after the prison closed in 2002. Strange noises. Disappearances. Ghostly apparitions. It seemed that the prison's bloody history had never truly been buried. It was as if something far darker than just the souls of the dead had been trapped within its walls. And as I walked through its gates that evening, I could already feel it, a presence, watching me, waiting for me to uncover the truth. But what really happened inside those walls that forced the state to lock it down after over 140 years of operation? Was it the horrific treatment of inmates, the overwhelming violence, or something far more sinister lurking in the shadows? What were the unexplained deaths that seemed to follow those who stepped foot inside the prison? Could the souls of the prisoners who never left still be haunting its cold halls? And what happened to the prison after its closure? Was it truly forgotten, or did something darker continue to stir in the shadows long after the gates were closed? As I stood there, staring up at the dilapidated facade of the prison, I knew that I had to find out the truth. No matter how terrifying it seemed. If you want to hear the exact, dark history of Old Joliet Prison, make sure to like and subscribe to get all the chilling facts that have been buried for years. Trust me, you will not want to miss what is coming next. Old Joliet Prison was once a symbol of America's brutal prison system. Its walls had seen the rise and fall of criminals, the grinding of injustice, and the bloodshed of desperate souls who never left. The stories of abuse and corruption were rampant. Inmates were forced into backbreaking labor, working the quarries, building the very walls that imprisoned them. They were left to rot in overcrowded cells, where disease spread like wildfire and the sounds of their screams could be heard for miles. The prison housed some of the most infamous figures in American crime, including John Wayne Gacy, the killer clown, whose chilling presence still haunts the prison's history. But it was not just the violent criminals that made Joliet infamous. The prison was known for its inhumane treatment of its inmates, with widespread reports of abuse, neglect, and even unexplained deaths. Many prisoners died under mysterious circumstances, their souls seemingly lost forever to the prison's twisted grip. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the prison's history was not the brutality, but the strange, inexplicable events that occurred after its closure. Long before the prison shut down, rumors began to spread about strange sightings within the prison grounds. Guards claimed to hear eerie whispers in the halls, while visitors reported seeing shadowy figures lurking in the windows of the prison's crumbling towers. But it was not just the guards or visitors who were affected. A few months before its closure, one of the prison's last wardens mysteriously disappeared. No trace was ever found. The stories continued to surface in the years that followed the prison's abandonment. Ghost hunters who ventured into the prison spoke of hearing footsteps in the dark, even though no one was around. Others claimed they saw figures moving in the shadows, ghostly apparitions of long-dead prisoners who seemed to wander the empty halls. The prison's legacy, it seemed, had a life of its own, one that refused to be buried. And as I stood in the ruins that night, the feeling that something was watching me grew stronger. A sense of dread settled over me, and I knew that there was more to the story of old Joliet prison than anyone had ever realized. An invitation from an unknown source leads me inside the gates. But what did it really want from me? My journey into the dark history of old Joliet prison continued that evening, under a sky that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 unspoken stories. The prison, looming in the distance, had always fascinated me. But there was something different this time. As I walked through the gates, the heavy silence of the place seemed to swallow me whole. Earlier that week, I had received a letter. It was unexpected, no return address, no signature, just a single line of text: "Find the truth in the silence." I had thought it was a prank at first, something to throw me off. But as the days passed, I could not shake the feeling that there was something real behind it, something that had been waiting for me to discover. Arriving at the prison, I could feel the sense of dread settle in the pit of my stomach. I stood there at the entrance for a moment, staring up at the crumbling walls, wondering what I would find inside. The place was abandoned, yes, but there was no denying that the energy within its walls was anything but quiet. It was as if the prison itself was alive, watching, waiting. I stepped further inside, the sound of my boots echoing through the empty courtyard. I could not help but feel the weight of the prison's past, a past filled with the stories of suffering, violence, and countless deaths. It was the kind of place where history was written in blood, and the very air seemed heavy with the remnants of those who had come before me. I walked deeper into the heart of the prison, my mind racing with thoughts of the letter and the hidden truths it promised. But what was I really looking for? And who had sent me this invitation? Why now? As I entered the first cell block, I paused. The building was falling apart, its walls crumbling with age, but there was still a certain unease in the air. It was not the kind of silence you would expect in a place abandoned for so long. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl, like something was just waiting to happen. The sound of my footsteps was the only noise breaking the stillness, and it seemed to grow louder with every step I took. It was then that I heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable. A whisper. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I waited, straining my ears, but the whispering had stopped. I chalked it up to the wind or perhaps my own imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I had read the stories, heard the rumors of strange occurrences at the prison after it closed. Guards reported hearing voices in the halls, strange shadows moving in the windows, and the occasional apparition of former inmates who had never truly left. But I had never believed it, until now. I continued my exploration, pushing through the decaying doors, when I found something that made my heart skip a beat. It was an old, worn notebook, sitting alone in the middle of a dimly lit cell. The pages were stained with something that looked like blood, and the ink was faded, but it was still legible. I knelt down, hesitant but compelled to open it. The notebook belonged to one of the prison's inmates, someone who had clearly endured unimaginable suffering. The entries spoke of torment, isolation, and the dark force that seemed to haunt every corner of the prison. But it was the final entry that stopped me cold. I hear them now. They are watching me. The Watcher has seen me. The Watcher. I had heard that name before. The locals spoke of a mysterious figure who had been linked to the prison for decades. Some said it was the spirit of a warden, others believed it was the manifestation of the prison's curse itself. No one knew who or what the Watcher truly was, but the stories were always the same: those who saw the Watcher were never seen again. I stood there, holding the notebook, a chill running down my spine. The whispers had returned, louder this time, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the prison bearing down on me. I quickly stuffed the notebook back into my bag and stood up, determined to leave. But as I turned to go, the door slammed shut behind me with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was no one there. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath misting in the air. I knew then that the stories were not just stories. The prison was alive, and it was not ready to let me go. The Watcher had seen me, and now there was no turning back. What was the Watcher? Who, or what, had been watching me since I entered the prison? And why had I been chosen to uncover the truth? The deeper I went, the more I heard. But it was not just the wind, something, or someone, was waiting in the darkness. I could feel it. The presence. It had been with me from the moment I stepped through the gates of old Joliet prison. I had thought I was just hearing things before, the whispers, the faint footsteps behind me. But now, it was unmistakable. It was not the wind, it was not my imagination, something, or someone, was watching me. I had heard of haunted places, of spirits that lingered long after their time, but nothing had prepared me for this. The deeper I ventured into the prison, the more intense the whispers became. They were not just faint murmurs anymore, they were growing louder, more distinct. As I walked down the narrow corridor, my flashlight flickering with every step, I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down on me. The walls seemed to be closing in, and the temperature dropped with every footstep I took. The shadows in the corners of the cells seemed to shift and sway, as if something, or someone, was lurking just out of view. I could feel the cold air creeping up my spine, my breath becoming visible in the dim light. And then, I heard it again. The whispering, but this time it was clearer, more urgent. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. I could not make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a voice, but not a living one. It sounded like it was coming from the walls themselves, from the very stones that had seen centuries of pain and suffering. The voice was cold, hollow, and filled with an anger that seemed to seep into the very air I was breathing. I turned around, but no one was there. The corridor was empty. Still, the whispering continued, growing louder and more desperate. I had to get out of there. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. In one of the far corners of the corridor, there was a door, half open. I had not noticed it before. I approached it cautiously, my steps slow and deliberate, as if the very act of walking toward it would awaken whatever waited inside. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and a wave of cold air hit me, the smell of damp stone and decay filling my nostrils. Inside, the room was darker than the rest of the prison. The only light came from the faint beam of my flashlight, which seemed to falter the deeper I went. The walls of the room were covered in old, faded graffiti, names, dates, and symbols that seemed to have been scratched into the stone long ago. Some of the names were familiar. They were the names of prisoners who had once been locked in this very place, their lives forever marked by the prison's brutal history. As I moved deeper into the room, I noticed something on the floor. A pile of old, brittle papers. I knelt down, my fingers trembling as I sifted through the pages. They were covered in what looked like faded ink, the writing barely legible. But one word stood out, repeated again and again on every page: Watcher. The more I read, the more it became clear that the Watcher was not just a name, it was something far more than I had ever imagined. It was a presence, an entity that had been tied to the prison from the very beginning, a dark force that had kept the souls of the dead trapped within its walls. The prisoners who had written about it spoke of strange occurrences, of seeing shadows in the corners of their cells, hearing voices in the dead of night, and feeling as though they were being watched at all times. The Watcher was not a spirit, it was something else, something far darker. And now, it was following me. I stood up, my heart racing, as the whispers grew louder, surrounding me. The words became clearer, though I could not understand them. They seemed to be coming from all directions, filling the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. And then, for a split second, I saw it. In the shadows of the far corner of the room, a figure, pale, gaunt, and shrouded in darkness. It was standing still, watching me. Its eyes were black, hollow, and filled with an unearthly rage. My breath caught in my throat, and I stumbled back, my mind screaming for me to run. But as I turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. I tried to pull the door open, but it would not budge. The air around me grew thick, suffocating, and the whispers became a chorus of voices, each one urging me to stay. I could feel the presence behind me, the figure in the shadows, moving closer. Every instinct in me screamed to get out, but I could not move. My body was frozen, trapped in the prison's grip. What was the Watcher? Was it a ghost, a spirit, or something far more dangerous? And what did it want with me? The truth behind the prison's darkest secrets had always been hidden, but now it was clear, the soul I had been searching for was not just a prisoner, it was the key to everything. I stood there in the dark room, trying to catch my breath. The door had slammed shut so forcefully, it felt like the whole building had shaken. I pulled on the handle, hoping it would give, but it remained locked tight. Panic crept up my spine as I realized I had no idea how to get out. The feeling of being trapped here, surrounded by the remnants of a violent history, began to settle in. The silence in the room was deafening. My flashlight flickered, its weak beam barely lighting the dusty floor in front of me. The walls seemed to close in as the oppressive air grew heavier. Every inch of this place felt alive, as if the prison itself was aware of my presence. My mind raced as I remembered the stories about spirits trapped in this place, about prisoners who never left, about something more sinister lurking in the shadows. But this wasn't just a story, it was happening to me. I turned around, my hand still gripping the door handle, and scanned the room. There was nothing but faded graffiti on the walls, scribbled names, dates, and crude symbols, nothing out of the ordinary. But something caught my eye. A small notebook lay on the floor, half hidden beneath a pile of old, shredded papers. My gut told me to leave it, to run and find a way out, but I could not help myself. I kneeled down and reached for it. The notebook felt heavy in my hands, as if it held more than just the thoughts of an old prisoner. I opened it carefully, flipping through the pages. The ink was faded, and the writing was uneven, like someone had written it quickly, under duress. The entries were filled with pain, with accounts of loneliness, of violence, of long days and endless nights. But it was the last entry that caught my attention. The words were scattered, almost frantic. They are still here. The Watcher watches. I feel it, I hear it. It is here, it will never leave. The Watcher. I had heard that name before. The locals spoke of a mysterious figure who had been linked to the prison for decades. No one knew who or what it was, but there were stories of a presence that had been tied to the prison long before any of the prisoners had ever set foot inside. Some said it was a warden, others believed it was a ghost. Whatever it was, it had always been there, watching, waiting. I set the notebook down, trying to shake off the feeling that was creeping up on me. The room was colder now, and I could feel the weight of the place pressing down on me. As I stood up, the whispers returned. They were faint, just on the edge of hearing, but they were there. I could feel them, like fingers brushing the back of my neck. My eyes darted around the room, but no one was there. That was when I saw it. In the far corner of the room, near the back wall, there was a shadow. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I stared, it moved. It was like the shadow had a life of its own, creeping along the walls, bending in unnatural ways. I could not make out the shape, but it was real. And it was moving closer. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt frozen, rooted to the spot. The whispers grew louder, and then, just as I thought I could not bear it any longer, the shadow stopped. It was still, but I could feel it there, watching me. I turned to leave again, but the door would not open. I pulled, I pushed, I even kicked it, but it stayed shut. My heart raced, panic setting in as I realized I could not escape. I was trapped, and I could feel the presence growing stronger with every second. The shadows, the whispers, they were not just figments of my imagination. This was real, and whatever was waiting in the darkness had no intention of letting me go. What was the Watcher? Was it a ghost, a spirit, or something far more dangerous? And what did it want with me? If you are still watching and have not liked this video yet, please do so now. It is totally free of cost for you, and it helps support the channel so we can bring more content like this. And do not forget to subscribe. One moment he was there. The next, gone. And the shadows grew longer, as if the prison itself was pulling him in. I was still reeling from the sight of the shadow in the corner of the room. The feeling of being trapped was suffocating. I was sure the prison itself had changed somehow, shifted, and the walls felt as though they were closing in around me. I knew the watcher was near. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening, and I could feel something lurking just beyond the reach of my flashlight. I turned to leave, but as I made my way back to the hallway, I noticed something strange. The guide, the one who had agreed to show me around, was gone. He had been right behind me just moments ago. I had heard his footsteps, had seen him walking in the corridor not far from where I was standing. I looked around, but there was no sign of him. I called out his name, nothing. Silence answered me, thick and oppressive. I checked the area, every corner, every door. It felt as though I had been walking for hours, but the place seemed to stretch and warp. The familiar layout of the prison was gone. Hallways that should have connected to other parts of the building led to dead ends. Rooms that had been there earlier seemed to have disappeared. I checked my phone to see if I had somehow wandered into an unfamiliar section of the building, but the screen was blank. The guide's voice, the sound of his steps, everything had vanished. There was nothing but the quiet and the growing sense of dread that seemed to fill the air. I continued my search, walking through the cells, calling out, but still nothing. The sound of my voice echoed through the empty hallways, but it felt like it was being swallowed by the prison. It was as if the walls themselves were consuming everything, me, my thoughts, my very presence, until there was nothing left. And then, out of the silence, I heard something faint, a whisper of movement, like soft footfalls on the floor. It was coming from a room at the far end of the corridor. The door was ajar, and I could see a dim light flickering inside. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, but as I neared, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. The flashlight in my hand flickered, then died, leaving me in complete darkness. Panic rose in my throat. I was alone in a place that was no longer just abandoned. It had become something else, something alive. I fumbled for my phone to use its light, but before I could turn it on, I heard the footsteps again. They were slow and deliberate, echoing down the hallway. Someone, something, was walking toward me. My pulse quickened, and I backed away, hoping to find a guide or someone who could help, but there was no one. I was alone in this prison of horrors. And then, in the dim light of my phone, I saw something. The shape of a figure moving toward me, just out of focus, but unmistakably human. It was the guide. I was sure of it. But there was something wrong. His posture was stiff, unnatural. He seemed to be moving, but his eyes were wide, glazed over, as if he was not in control of his own body. I called out to him, but he did not respond. The figure continued to approach, moving slowly toward me. With every step, the sense of dread grew. The guide's face was pale, his lips slightly parted, as if he was trying to speak, but no words came. His eyes never met mine, they were focused on something behind me, and I could feel it. The watcher was there, in the shadows, watching both of us. The guide's movements grew more erratic, as if something was forcing him forward. It was then that I realized, he was not walking toward me. He was walking away, being pulled by something else, something far more powerful than either of us. The figure moved past me, his body stiff as a board, and the air around me turned cold. It was as though the prison itself was alive, pulling the guide deeper into its clutches. I reached out to grab him, but my hand passed right through him, like he was a ghost, a part of the prison, no longer living, no longer human. He disappeared into the darkness, leaving me standing there alone. In that moment, I understood. The prison had claimed him, just like it had claimed so many others. The watcher was not just a ghost. It was the prison itself, a force that fed on those who entered, who lost their way within its walls. And now, it was coming for me. What had happened to the guide? Was he really taken by the prison, or was he something else entirely? Could I escape before I too became part of the prison's twisted history? The warden's ghost appeared, telling me his side of the story. But what he revealed was far worse than I could ever imagine. I had never felt fear like this before. The Watcher, this presence, was no longer just an abstract idea, no longer a myth whispered among locals. It was real, and it was hunting me. Every step I took felt like I was walking deeper into a trap, with the walls of the prison closing in around me. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. My breath was visible in the cold air, and the silence of the prison was shattered only by the distant sound of my own footsteps. I was alone, but I could feel eyes on me, following me through every dark corner and hallway. As I moved further down the crumbling corridors, something shifted. The walls seemed to pulse, as if they were alive, breathing. The oppressive weight of the place seemed to press down harder with each step, and I knew I could not run from it anymore. The Watcher was no longer just a presence in the shadows. It was here, in front of me. I could feel it drawing nearer, and I could hear something, low whispers, murmuring my name. I did not know what to expect when I first came to this prison. I had heard the stories of spirits, of restless souls trapped in these forsaken walls. But I had not come here expecting to find something like this. The air was thick with a presence that I could not fully understand, but it was undeniable. And then, as I walked past a shattered window, I saw something, someone, standing in the dim light, just beyond the broken glass. It was a figure, dressed in a prison uniform. I froze. It was a man, tall and thin, with a pale face that seemed to float in the shadows. His eyes were hollow, empty, but they were fixed on me. The figure did not move, but I could feel his gaze as though it was searing into my soul. I could not explain why, but I knew who he was before he even spoke. This was no ordinary ghost. This was the warden, the one whose presence had haunted this place for so long. I approached cautiously, my heart beating in my chest. The warden's ghost did not move as I came closer, but there was something in the air that made my blood run cold. A thick, almost suffocating energy surrounded him. He did not speak, but I could hear his voice in my mind, clear and filled with malice. It was not just the whispers from before. This time, it was him, and he was speaking directly to me. His words were like ice, cutting through me with each syllable. "You should not have come here," he said. "This prison was never meant for the likes of you. The walls have eyes, ears, and they are watching you. They are always watching." I stood there, unable to move, trying to make sense of what was happening. The warden's figure seemed to shimmer in the darkness, as if he were fading in and out of existence. But his voice, that voice, it was real. It felt like the walls themselves were speaking through him. "The Watcher is not a spirit," he continued, his voice low, filled with something I could not quite grasp. "It is the soul of this prison, born of the misery and suffering that has lived here for over a century. And now, it has chosen you. You are its next victim, just like all those before you." His words hit me like a punch in the gut. I had thought I was here to uncover a history, to expose the truth. But I had stumbled upon something far worse than I could have ever imagined. This prison, with all its violence and torment, was not just a building. It was a vessel, a living entity, and it had a hunger. And I was the one it had chosen to feed on. The warden's ghost took a step toward me, and I felt the temperature drop even more. The air was so cold now, it burned my skin. I wanted to run, to get away from him, but my legs felt like lead, and I could not move. His presence was too overwhelming, too powerful. He raised his hand, and as he did, I felt a strange force pulling at me, as if the prison itself was trying to claim me. "You will join the others," he whispered. "Just like the ones who came before you. The Watcher has already claimed them. And now, it will claim you." At that moment, I felt the weight of the prison's curse pressing down on me. The stories I had heard, the whispers of haunted halls and restless souls, they were all true. But this was no simple haunting. This was something far darker, something that could not be escaped. The warden's figure began to fade, disappearing into the darkness of the prison, but I could still feel him. The watcher was still watching, still waiting. And now, it knew who I was. It knew I had uncovered its secret. And there would be no escaping it. What did the warden mean by the watcher choosing me? Was the curse truly tied to the prison, or was there more to it than that? And could I find a way to break free before the prison claimed me, just like it had claimed so many before? The curse is real. And it is not just a story to scare tourists, it is something much darker, something far older. I stood there in the darkness, the weight of the warden's words pressing down on me like a stone. The air was cold, but it felt different now, thicker, as if it were alive, holding its breath. The watcher, the warden, this place, it was all connected. I had stumbled upon something far worse than I could have ever imagined, something far older than this prison itself. But what was it? What kind of force was I dealing with? I had uncovered the past, but I had not prepared myself for the truth. As I stood frozen in place, the whispers returned, louder than before. They were no longer just distant murmurs. They were clear now, sharp, like 1,000 voices speaking at once. They were coming from the walls, from the floors, from the very ground beneath my feet. The voices spoke in a language I could not understand, but there was an urgency to them, as if they were trying to warn me, to tell me something that I was not ready to hear. I turned away from where the warden's ghost had disappeared, trying to shake the feeling of his presence still lingering in the air. But as I moved deeper into the prison, the whispers grew louder. They were no longer just voices, they were pulling me, guiding me, as if they had a purpose, as if they knew what I was meant to find. The corridor ahead seemed to stretch out farther than it should have, the shadows growing deeper, more menacing. I did not want to keep going, but something inside me urged me forward. I had to know. I had to understand what this place was, what it wanted from me. The Watcher had chosen me. But why? What did it need from me? And why did it have such control over this prison, over the souls trapped inside? I walked, my steps hesitant, until I reached a small, narrow doorway. It was barely visible in the dim light, tucked away behind a pile of old debris. The door was old, weathered, its wood chipped and cracked. But there was something about it that called to me, something that told me I was about to uncover something that would change everything. I reached for the handle, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked open, revealing a small, hidden room. It was bare, except for a small wooden box sitting in the center of the floor. The box was old, its surface covered in dust, but there was something about it that made it stand out. It felt important, like it held the key to everything. The whispers grew louder, almost frantic, as if they were urging me to open it. I hesitated. I could feel the weight of their voices in the air, pressing me to act. I had to open it. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I reached for the box. It felt heavier than it looked, as if it was holding something inside, something that had been waiting for years, centuries even. With a final breath, I lifted the lid. Inside, there was nothing but a single piece of paper. It was old, yellowed with age, but the words written on it were clear. They were written in a language I did not recognize, but as I looked at it, something strange happened. The words seemed to shift, to change, until they were in English. They were clear, like someone was speaking them directly into my mind. It was a warning. A warning about the prison. A warning about the curse. The words read, "This prison was built on a pact made long before its walls were erected. The Watcher is the guardian of this pact. It feeds on those who enter, and those who are trapped within it can never escape. Only the one who finds the truth can break the curse. But the truth will cost you more than you can imagine." I felt the blood drain from my face as the meaning of the words settled in. The prison had been built on a pact, a dark bargain that tied the souls of the dead to this place. The Watcher was not just a ghost, it was the embodiment of that pact, the force that had bound these souls to the prison for eternity. And now, it had chosen me. But what was the cost of breaking this curse? I stood up, the box still in my hands, my mind racing. The truth was here, right in front of me, but I had no idea how to use it. How could I possibly break a curse like this? And if I did, what would it mean for me? What was the Watcher really after? What exactly was the pact that bound the souls to this prison? What was the cost of breaking the curse, and could I survive it? I thought I had found a way out, but the prison itself began to fight back. Was I truly escaping, or was I walking right into its grasp? The moment I touched the door, I felt it. A jolt ran through me, and for a second, I froze, hands still gripping the cold metal. It was an instinct, a deep knowing, that something was wrong. The door should have opened, but it did not. I pulled again, harder this time, but the door remained stubbornly shut. The room seemed to shift around me, as if the prison itself had decided to stop me from leaving. It was not just a door that would not open, it felt like the entire prison was closing in, like it had been waiting for me to make a move. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, my breath quickening as I realized something was not right. The air grew colder, and with the drop in temperature, a heaviness took over the space. The faint whispers, which had been quiet at first, were now more distinct, more urgent. The voices of past prisoners, their cries, and their anguish, echoed in my ears. I could hear them more clearly than ever before. But what terrified me the most was how close it felt. It was as if they were standing right behind me. I turned, feeling a knot in my stomach twist tighter, expecting to see someone, or something. But the hallway was empty. I stepped back, my heart racing, my mind racing even faster. I knew I was not alone. This prison, with all its history, its torment, had taken something from me, something I could not yet name. And now, it was making sure I could not leave. The door, the last chance to escape, had become a barrier. But not just any barrier, this was something far worse. I took another step back, scanning the room for any signs of the guide who had been with me. But he was gone. I did not hear him walk away, did not see him leave. One moment he was there, walking with me through these dark hallways, and the next, he had vanished. I thought maybe he had gone ahead of me, but I could not feel his presence anywhere. The silence was deafening, the kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The air was thick, and it seemed to press in on me from all sides. I called out for the guide, but my voice was swallowed by the emptiness. That was when I heard it, soft footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. My breath hitched in my throat as I turned around, expecting to see him. But there was no one there. The footsteps continued, but they were not mine. They were not the guide's either. The sound grew louder, closer. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but my feet felt frozen to the floor. I turned again, hoping to find some way out, but it was the same, nothing. Only the sound of those footsteps getting closer and closer. I looked down the corridor ahead, my mind screaming for me to act, but before I could take a step forward, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing at the end of the hallway, was the guide. But he was not the same. His eyes were wide, fixed on me with a vacant, glassy stare. His movements were stiff, unnatural. It was as if he was being controlled, his body nothing more than a puppet pulled by invisible strings. He moved closer, his steps slow, deliberate. I wanted to call out to him, to ask what was happening, but the words stuck in my throat. His presence felt wrong, everything about him was wrong. As he came nearer, I realized he was not walking toward me. He was walking away, walking past me, as though I were nothing more than a shadow. But the most disturbing part? His eyes. They never once met mine. His gaze was fixed on something behind me. And I knew, deep down, that it was not just the guide standing there anymore. It was something far worse. Something that had taken him, had taken his will, and was now making him walk into the dark, deeper into the prison. The walls seemed to tremble. The shadows began to twist, to move in unnatural ways. My heart pounded harder as I took a step back, unable to tear my eyes away from the guide, this thing that once had been him. His figure began to fade, merging with the darkness, until there was nothing left but the hollow echo of his footsteps. I stood there, frozen in place, my mind racing. The prison had taken him, and now, it was coming for me. The Watcher was not a spirit, was not some ghost of the past, it was this place, this prison, this living nightmare that had trapped me. And it was not going to let me go. If you are still following this chilling story, it means it deserves your precious like and subscribe. The warden's ghost appeared, telling me his side of the story. But what he revealed was far worse than I could ever imagine. I thought I had reached the end of the road. I had uncovered the truth behind the prison's curse, pieced together its dark history, but the moment I touched that door, something shifted. The door that should have been my way out would not open. The feeling that had been gnawing at me since I first stepped into this place became a full-on weight in my chest. I pulled again, harder this time, but the door remained immovable. I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what was happening. There was no sound, just an oppressive silence pressing in from all sides. The whispers had faded, but now there was a new presence in the air. It was like the prison itself was breathing, alive and aware of my every move. I felt it, the pulse of the walls, the energy from every corner of the building. It was almost as if the prison was keeping me here, not letting me leave, because it was not finished with me yet. Then, I heard it, soft footsteps behind me. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around, expecting to see someone. But there was no one there. The footsteps continued, though, as if something, or someone, was following me. I moved forward again, trying to shake the feeling, but the sound grew louder, more distinct. It was like a slow march, deliberate and purposeful, just behind me. I wanted to turn back and confront whatever it was, but I could not. I had to find the truth. I had to understand what was really going on. It was then that I noticed a light flickering down the hallway, coming from a room I had not seen before. The hallway had stretched further than it should have, and the room before me was bathed in a cold, unnatural light. I walked towards it, heart pounding, unsure of what I would find. The door was already slightly ajar, and when I stepped inside, it felt different. The room smelled musty, old papers scattered across a desk, and the walls were covered with strange maps of the prison, some marked in red. But my attention was drawn to an old ledger sitting on the desk. I walked over, compelled by something deep inside. The pages of the ledger were yellowed, the ink faded, but the words on the last page stopped me dead in my tracks. It was a message. A warning. The Watcher's bargain is struck. The soul must serve until the debt is paid. The prison's curse will be fulfilled when the final soul is claimed. The warden is bound to the walls, bound to the Watcher, and to the ones who serve. The truth hit me like a wave. The curse was not just a myth. It was real. The warden had not just been a figure in this prison's history. He had made a deal that tied him, and everyone who entered, to this place. His soul was bound to it, just like mine was now. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it all, I felt a cold chill brush against my neck. The air grew thick, heavier, and I knew he was here. The warden's ghost. I turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway. His form was pale, gaunt, and his eyes, empty. There was nothing in them, just a hollow darkness that made my stomach turn. He did not speak at first. He just stood there, staring at me, and the weight of his presence seemed to push me back. Then, finally, he spoke, his voice rough, as though he had not used it in years. "You think you can escape this place," he said, his voice echoing in the silence of the room. "But the curse is not something you can undo. It is part of the land, part of the very stone and brick. It was always meant to be this way." I took a step back, my mind racing. Why? Why make the deal? Why trap all these souls here? The warden's eyes flickered, almost as if he was remembering something painful. Survival, he said quietly. I did not have a choice. The prison, it was already cursed before I ever came here. It was a force, something I could not control. The Watcher, it offered a way to contain it. But that came at a cost. It always does. I felt the weight of his words sink in. The Watcher was not just a ghost, it was the prison itself. It was an entity, an ancient force that had trapped not only the souls of the prisoners but also the warden. His fate was tied to the prison, just like mine was now. You cannot escape, the warden continued, his voice growing colder. Once you are marked, you are part of the prison. There is no way out. Not for me, and not for you. I stood there, frozen, the reality of his words sinking in. There was no escape. The curse was real, and it had claimed me just as it had claimed him. The final choice was mine, but no one had warned me about the price of freedom. The warden's words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of the dark truth I had uncovered. The prison had claimed me, just as it had claimed him, and just as it had claimed every soul that had ever set foot in these walls. The Watcher was not just a force, it was the prison itself, alive with a hunger that devoured anyone who entered. I had no way out, or so I thought. I stood there, staring at the warden, his hollow eyes fixed on me, and the weight of the prison pressing down on my shoulders. The room felt colder with each passing second, and the silence was suffocating. The very air seemed to be alive, whispering, crawling under my skin. The prison was tightening its grip, and I could feel it. The Watcher had been waiting for me, and now that I had uncovered the truth, it was not going to let me go. But as I stood there, trapped by the curse of the prison, something stirred deep inside me. A thought, a possibility, something I had not considered before. Could I break the curse? Could I defy the prison, defy the Watcher, and escape? It was not a matter of if, but how. I had to make a choice. I had to face the truth of the warden's words, but I also had to realize that the power to change my fate was in my hands. The warden's ghost stood motionless, as though waiting for me to accept my fate, to resign myself to the prison's eternal grip. But I could not. I could not let this place win. I refused to become another soul trapped here, another lost prisoner forgotten by time. I had come this far, uncovered the truth. I had to make the choice to leave. The weight of the room grew heavier, the air thicker, as the darkness seemed to press closer. I felt the presence of the Watcher behind me, surrounding me, but I knew now, it was not invincible. It was not all-powerful. It was tied to the prison, to the souls it had trapped, and to the curse that had bound us all. And if I was to escape, I had to break the curse. I turned my back on the warden, who seemed to fade further into the shadows as I moved. I stepped toward the door, the same door that had refused to open before. This time, I knew that the choice was mine. I had to make it work. The whispers were loud now, frantic, as if the prison itself was trying to stop me, but I ignored them. I placed my hand on the door handle once more. It was not cold anymore. It was warm. The prison, the Watcher, everything, it was shifting, adapting to my will. The walls around me seemed to breathe in and out with me. I pulled the door open. The moment the door opened fully, I stepped into the light. The darkness of the prison, the weight of the curse, it was gone. The Watcher's presence, which had followed me relentlessly, was no longer there. I was free. I looked back at the prison one last time. The walls that had once held me captive now stood still, silent, like a fading memory. The curse had been broken. I had made it out. But even as I walked away, I knew the truth. The Watcher was not gone. It was not destroyed. It was waiting. There would always be those who entered the prison, those who were drawn to its cursed history. But I had escaped. And that was enough. I left the prison behind, the sounds of its whispers fading into the distance. The world outside was still, calm. I had made it. I had broken free. The prison had claimed its victims for years, but now, it would no longer claim me. I had broken the curse. I had survived. If you have enjoyed this story and are still watching, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. Make sure to turn on the bell icon so you will never miss an upcoming story.